ancestors. Joshua fought the battle of Jericho, Jericho, Jericho. Joshua fought the battle of Jericho, the walls come tumbling down. Joshua fought the battle of Jericho, Jericho, Jericho. Joshua fought the battle of
Welcome to the first of our classes in moving forward the book of Joshua. As you may have noticed, my plan was to start this class right after we finished at Simchat Torah, when we rolled the Torah back, because we always read through the 5 books of Moses and then we start over again. And this is book 6, and we wanted to know what happens. But things being what they were this year, I couldn't exactly get started in October. So here we are, starting a little bit later than that, which is fine. And I am thrilled that you are all here with us tonight. I shared a source sheet with everyone. I'm going to share it in the chat again in case you really want to print it out. But you are absolutely not required to print it. I will, let's see, let me share it again. I'm running 2 different computers here so that I'll be able to share things. And now I have to find where chat is. There it is. Okay. There we go. But I'm going to share it on the screen so you'll be able to follow along. And the Hebrew is there for most of it, but it's not there to intimidate anyone. We're going to use it minimally, but it's available for anyone who wants to look at it. I don't want anyone to feel intimidated by anything that we're doing. We're going to dive into text. We're also going to look at a little bit of Talmud, at Midrash, at Torah, at Haftarah. I'm going to explain what all of those are as we encounter them. But most importantly, we're going to be having conversation with each other and with the text. And we each come from our own different perspectives. Some among us may believe that Torah is the absolute word of God, transmitted without changes, came to us from Mount Sinai, was whispered into the ear of Moses, and has not changed since that time. Others believe that these are completely the words of humans, and that they are the stories of our people, that these are the stories that have been told around campfires by our ancestors for thousands and thousands of years throughout the generations, to explain things that they understood and things that they didn't understand, and to try to make sense of the world. So one of the things that's wonderful in all of our Torah stories is that the people in them are real human beings. They are not whitewashed. They're not perfected. They have flaws. Some of them have a lot of flaws, and we are going to find that out. And as my holy husband Akiva reminds us, based very much on his own learning and on the words of Shefa Gold, who he reads from for us every week, these stories are not just about those people then, they are about us now. And so we're going to dive in and find out how these stories relate to them then, but also to us now. There are no stupid questions. I will probably say, I don't know, but I'll find out a lot during this class. And as I said, we're going to be recording all of the classes. So if you miss one, they will be available. If you know anyone else who wants to join, please invite them, and they can get caught up if they want to, or they can just dive in whenever they want to. So that's fine. And as I said before, if you don't want your words or your image recorded, turn off your camera and use the chat for questions. These classes are offered at no charge, but you are absolutely welcome to donate to panayshore.org. There's a donate page there that is used not only for our ongoing operations, but also for our mission of helping the Jewish communities in Uganda and Kenya. Our classes are going to be about an hour long. They're going to be almost every week, not on January 28th, when I'm going to be on a music conference online. And we're also going to be skipping several weeks at the end of February, beginning of March. So, good. I got that all in very quickly. I provided a source sheet for this class where we might use it for the first 2 weeks. We'll see. We're going to start with a blessing for Torah study. So I will provide the words. Most of them will be familiar to you. How many classes will there be? Good question. I don't know. I bet there will be about 10 classes, but it kind of depends on what pace we go. So we'll see. Okay. And I'm glad to see that I can see the questions. We'll see if that stays once I have the source sheet up, but I think the way I have it with 2 computers, I will be able to see them. Okay, so the last 3 words of the blessing are la'asok b'divrei Torah, to busy ourselves with the words of Torah. But you can unmute yourself so that we can all say the blessing together and hear a wonderful cacophony of voices. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher
Anu
b'mitzvotav
Banu
la'asok
b'divrei
Torah. Blessed are you, the eternal one, who has given us commandments, ways of being in the world, and has instructed us to soak ourselves in Torah. So I want to start with, since there are a lot of us here, we're going to start going around with exceptionally brief introductions. What I'd love for you to do, and I will call you out the way I see you on the screen, your name, where you are, and one thing either that you know about Joshua or something that you want to learn, but one sentence, no more than that. Okay, let's start with Alan Arthur Funk. Where are you? And
I am sitting in my black recliner chair
yeah, where?
in my home, 1966, Bladenberg Drive, Westbury, New York.
Okay, and one thing you know or you want to know about Joshua?
Well, I'd love to really delve into the story of Jericho.
Okay, great. Thank you.
And the destruction of the wall.
Thank you. Great. Okay, Rabbi Anita.
Hi, I'm Rabbi Anita Silvert. I am sitting in my office in Northbrook, Illinois, which is a northern suburb of Chicago. And one of the things that's always intrigued me about Joshua is his transformation from Moses' sidekick and on a spiritual level where he's experiencing the mountain, blah, 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 to a military leader and the one who goes into battle.
Excellent. Thank you. Joan.
I'm Joan Perrin. I'm a congregant of Rabbi Lisa's, and I'm in Port Jeff Station. And Joshua's always been one of my favorite characters because he's been very noble and a good leader and followed Moses. And he was played by John Derek in the movie The Ten Commandments.
Okay, thank you. Susanna.
Hi, I'm Susanna. I'm new. I'm in the 2025 cohort at PRS. I am in Seattle in my studio, painting studio. And Joshua, I often feel like I hear it being used almost weaponized by like right wing Christians as a as the sort of virtuous story of conquest. But I would like to read it more deeply and have a fuller understanding of what it is actually about.
Thank you. Great. Paula.
Hi, I'm Paula Baruch, and I'm in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada. I don't know a lot about Joshua and the writings and the prophets that come after the Torah. As you said, we read the Torah every year and study and go in deeply, and this is a great chance, I think, to go beyond that.
Great. Thank you. Robin.
I'm Robin. I am in South Setauket. And what I know about Joshua so far is that he's blessed, courageous, and, just has a fire within him. So that's what I've learned so far.
Great. Thanks. Daniel.
I am Rabbi Daniel. I am in Clark Summit, Pennsylvania, which is a suburb of Scranton. Joshua is actually one of the books in my personal life that has always got sort of pushed to the side. We don't read it. It's obviously it's not part of the Torah, and in the Haftarah cycle, it's basically not included. So when I'm looking at weekly Torah portions in the Haftarah, it seems for some reason Joshua gets completely pushed to the side. So I'm looking to delve into Joshua on a deeper basis.
Great. Thank you. Arlene.
My name is Arlene. I too am a congregant and live on Long Island. And I would like to learn anything that Rabbi Lisa can teach us.
Thank you. Okay, Phil.
My name is Phil, and I'm in Yaphank, New York. And I know very little about Joshua other than the Battle of Jericho, and that many years ago, Alan Sherman wrote a little satirical ditty about Joshua and Jericho.
That's true. Okay. Joshua Rest.
Hi, I'm Joshua, and I'm on Long Island. I'm one of Rabbi Lisa's congregants also, and I don't know too much about my namesake, and I'm very curious to learn more. Jonah, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, Jonah.
I don't want to do that much.
Jonah was wondering if there'll be a study session about his name one day.
I think there will be one day. Absolutely. We will definitely get to his book. That sounds like a great idea. Okay, Diane.
Just finding my mouse. I'm Diane. I'm in Plainview, Long Island. And what I know about Joshua is that he was Moses's chosen successor to bring the Israelites into the land of Canaan.
It's true. Okay. Akiva, can you pop your head over here for a second?
Can.
Okay. Get yourself on screen. There we go.
I am Akiva, the believer, sometimes known as Miss Congeniality. And I live very close to the person who is speaking at the moment. And I would like to know the actual tune that Joshua played that brought the walls down.
I'm not sure that I can reveal that, but maybe we can figure it out together. Okay, so thank you all. So this session, and it may take more than one session for us to get through the source sheet, because as you said, it's 8 pages long, and I don't know if we will get through it all today. It will kind of depend on how fast we want to go, and that's really up to all of us. We are starting with not the book of Joshua. We're starting with Joshua in the Torah, in the first 5 books. We're going to be exploring Joshua's presence and development within the Torah and setting the stage for his leadership in the book of Joshua. So I am going to share the source sheet, which some of you have printed out and not all of you have, and that's okay. We're going to see how this works. Can you all see it? I can. Yes?
Yes.
Good. You're all seeing it and you're hearing me, and I can still see you. And I think I can still see if you ask questions in the chat, which would be fantastic. Okay. So we are starting just to talk about Joshua. He lived in the 13th century BCE. He was born in the year 2406, which is about 1355 BCE. He lived until he was 110 years old. Now, let me see. I know I have the source sheet up, but I want to show you. Let's see if I can find it. This may be the picture that you have of Joshua in your mind. John Derek, Bo Derek's husband, shirtless. This is what he looked like in the 10 Commandments, which Akiva and I had the opportunity to watch again over the last few days. There is a lot in that movie that is fictionalized, especially according to Henry Abramson, who is a great scholar. If you're looking to do some fabulous study of Jewish history, look him up on YouTube. His lectures are fantastic. Especially the story about Lilia, who is standing next to him, is completely fictional. But he does look fabulous. So that's that is maybe what he that's an interesting impression of what he might have looked like. Who knows? But we'll go back and look at here we go. The source sheet. Here we go. Okay, so according to the book of Joshua, he is buried at Timnath Heres, as are his father and Caleb, who we will meet later in today. The town of Timnath Heres has been identified as Kifil Haris in the West Bank. And there's an annual commemoration of Joshua's death that is held on the 26th of Nisan, which is in late April. So Joshua's name was not originally Joshua, it was Hosea. So let's read these two verses from Numbers. Let's see, who would like to read to start with? I'm not going to do all of this reading. So I'm going to just pick randomly. If I pick on you and you don't want to read, you can pass. But I'm just going to look at who's up first. So Susanna, would you like to just read both of these verses from Numbers?
Sure. From the tribe of Ephraim, Hosea, son of Nun. Those were the names of the participants whom Moses sent to scout the land. But Moses changed the name of Hosea, son of Nun, to Joshua.
Okay, great. So Moses changes Joshua's name by adding a yud to his name. And the yud is actually one of the letters of the divine holy name, right? The yud and the hey and the vav and the hey, the four-letter tetragrammaton, which is God's holy name that we don't ever pronounce. And by adding that yud to God's holy name to Joshua's name, it indicates that he has God's presence and support. Hosea means salvation, and Joshua means God saves. And when you use a part of God's name in a human being's name, it has a special name to that name. It's called a theophoric name. So any name that has El in it, like Mikael, who is like God, any of those names that have any part of God's name in them are theophoric names. So we see name changes elsewhere in the Torah. I bet you can think of a couple of other name changes in the Torah. Does anyone want to call out? You're welcome to unmute and call out any name changes you can think of somewhere else in either the 5 books or elsewhere in the Tanakh.
Jacob to Israel.
Jacob to Israel, yes, absolutely.
Avram to Abraham.
Sarai to
Avram-
Sarah.
Right, Avram to Abraham, Sarai to Sarah. So Avram to Abraham and Sarai to Sarah are very much like this, where they're adding the hey from God's name from Abraham. So his name goes from exalted father to father of a multitude. And Sarai gets her yud taken off. Both her name Sarai and Sarah both mean princess, but there is a midrash that says that the yud that was taken off of Sarai's name is the yud that was added to Joshua's name right here. There are a few other names that get changed in Torah. Does anybody remember any of the others? Some of them are pretty obscure. So, yes, Sarah does also add a hey, but it takes off a yud before adding the hey.
Avram to Abraham.
Right, we had that one, yes. So, Joseph actually gets his name changed to Zaphanat Paneah by Pharaoh. He gets an Egyptian name. Solomon gets renamed by Samuel. I'm sorry, Solomon. Sorry, in Samuel, Solomon gets renamed by Nathan from
the prophet.
Solomon to Jedediah. I love the name Jedediah.
Moses had an Egyptian name, but the rabbis gave him a name.
Well, actually, I think Moshe is an Egyptian name.
Yeah.
Right, exactly. Naomi changes her own name. She says, stop calling me Naomi, which means pleasant. Call me Mara, which means bitter. I think if a lot of parents realized that Mara meant bitter, they might not name their daughters Mara. And there are a few others. Zedekiah is a name change, and in the book of Daniel, there are a few name changes there as well. But the name change here, what do you think? Any thoughts about what the significance is of this name change?
Well, if Moses is going to send this guy into the land that God promised, then it doesn't hurt to add a little godness to his name.
Absolutely. And this happens right before he goes to search out the land, to scout out the land. And we'll get to that in a little while. So he comes from the tribe of Ephraim, and there are details about that, about his detailed genealogy in the book of Chronicles. If you're really interested in that, you can go look in Chronicles 7:20 to 27 and read all of the details that go from Ephraim all the way down to Joshua. So the next thing that happens, the next time we hear about Joshua, I'm sorry, the first time we hear about Joshua, because that I just mentioned about his name, we don't get to until the book of Numbers. The first time we hear about Joshua is in the battle against Amalek. So, who is Amalek anyway? Ooh. What do we know about Amalek? You know what? Before we who knows anything about Amalek that you want to tell us? Yes, Akiva?
Amalek was known to pick on the weakest people. He was following the tribes of Israel as they were marching, and he was known to pick on the weakest, the ones who were straddling behind, and kill them. And the Hebrews were instructed to blot out Amalek and then to blot out his name. And
You got it. Absolutely. That is exactly what I was going to say. So Amalek attacked the Israelites when they were leaving Egypt. The Israelites defeated Amalek, and God cursed them because they immorally attacked the Israelites, and they targeted the old and the weak. So let's read this portion right here, Exodus 17, 8 through 14. Daniel, would you like
Sure.
to read this?
Absolutely. Amalek came and fought with Israel at Rephidim. Moshe said to Joshua, "Pick some troops for us and go out and do battle with Amalek. Tomorrow I will station myself on the top of the hill with the rod of God in my hand." Joshua did as Moshe told him and fought with Amalek, while Moshe, Aaron, and Hur went up to the top of the hill. Then whenever Moshe held up his hand, Israel prevailed. But whenever he let down his hand, Amalek prevailed. But Moshe's hands grew heavy, so they took a stone and put it under him, and he sat on it, while Aaron and Hur, one on each side, supported his hands. Thus his hands remained steady until the sun set. And Joshua overwhelmed the people of Amalek with the sword. Then Adonai said to Moshe, "Inscribe this in a document as a reminder, and read it aloud to Joshua. I will utterly blot out the memory of Amalek from under heaven."
Thank you. Okay, so we sometimes hear people being referred to as Amalek today. Have you ever heard that? Yeah, what do we hear about Amalek today?
Well, wasn't Haman a descendant in the Purim story?
We hear that. I'm not sure if it's really true that Haman was truly a descendant through genealogy, or whether he was really just a descendant through psychology, let's just say. I think we sometimes hear that other people in our history, anyone who chooses to pick on the Jewish people out of their in any way in which we are oppressed, are sometimes considered modern Amaleks.
Well, Hitler was
Exactly. And this is the story. Oh, and we are at 7:28. Akiva and I have a have a little thing that we say that in just about any class, at about 26 to 28 minutes into the class, Hitler always gets mentioned. So it just happens. I mean, that's how it happens. Anyway, so
there are some who think that Netanyahu is doing to Hamas what God wanted us to do to Amalek.
Yeah, blotting out the name. Yes, that's there are some who believe that. Absolutely.
I heard a lot of people with whom I do not agree toss that name around with the current vice president as a distortion of her name, and I found that highly offensive.
Yeah,
but it is a name that gets tossed around when somebody is perceived to be an enemy.
Yes, absolutely. It gets used in a very pejorative and offensive kind of way. Anyone who is seen as an enemy of the Jews, it's a dog whistle, you know, saying Amalek. People understand, people who, if you understand, you understand. That's what it means. And so if you hear people referring to someone as Amalek, this is the verse that it comes from.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's move forward. The next place where we hear about Joshua is at the ascent of Mount Sinai. So Joshua accompanies Moses partway up Mount Sinai, demonstrating his privileged position and his proximity to divine revelation. So let's see who's next. Joan, would you like to read the verse from Exodus?
Sure. God said to Moses, "Come up to me on the mountain and wait there, and I will give you the stone tablets with the teachings and commandments which I have inscribed to instruct them." So Moses and his attendant Joshua arose, and Moses ascended the mountain of God.
Thank you. So now we are going to dive deeply into what we refer to as the sources, which are the commentaries of the medieval rabbis. They fill in the blanks and answer some of the questions that come up when we read the Torah text, which itself is very sparse and leaves a lot of holes. So I'm going to explain who each of these ancient rabbis are so you have some background. And then as we dive into these sources, you can all call yourselves Torah scholars. So the first one that we're going to look at is Rashi. So I will just tell you a little bit about Rashi. Rashi is is the nickname for Rabbi Shlomo Yitzchaki. So Resh Shin Yud comes out as Rashi. Rashi came from 11th century France. He wrote commentary on all of the Torah, the Tanakh, all the Torah, the Nevi'im, which is the prophets, and the Ketuvim, which is the writings. And so that's why it's called Tanakh. Rashi is the most widely read and goes to the simple meaning of the text, but also has interpretive elaborations. And Rashi is the leading scholar. His commentary is the basis of almost everyone else's commentaries. Rashi was a winemaker. He had 3 daughters, Yocheved, Miriam, and Rachel, and no sons. So his daughters studied and helped him write when he was too weak. And legend has it that they laid tefillin, although we don't have any proof of that. They married his disciples and they started rabbinic dynasties. And as Rabbi Anita wrote into the chat, when Rashi writes, we always ask what the question is that he was trying to answer, or what's bothering Rashi? Why did he write whatever it is that he wrote? So let's read the Rashi on this and try to figure out what was bothering Rashi that made him write this. So let's see, who is up next? Paula. Can you read us the Rashi?
Sure. And Moses rose and his minister Joshua. I'm not sure in what capacity Joshua appears here, but I think that as a disciple, he was accompanying the teacher as far as the place where the bounds of the mountain were marked out, whence onward he was not permitted to proceed. From that point, Moses alone ascended the mountain of God, whilst Joshua pitched his tent there and stayed there during the whole 40 days which Moses spent on the mountain. For thus we find that when Moses came down from the mountain, it states, and Joshua heard the voice of the people that they shouted, from which we may infer that he was not with them in the camp.
Okay, so what was bothering Rashi? What question was he trying to answer?
Why was Yehoshua not permitted to ascend the mountain?
Okay.
Maybe.
That's a great question. So why did Joshua not go up the mountain with Moses? Why did he stay behind? Good. What else?
Well, the text puts them together, Moshe and Yehoshua. And then, but it says only Moses went up. So that argues, the question is, well, where did Joshua go?
Right. So What's bothering him?
We don't know where he went
Uh-huh.
and what he was doing.
Right.
And
So
it says we may infer that he was not with them in the camp. So where was he?
Right.
Still on the mountain.
right.
Yeah, but what was he doing? Was he could he hear what Moses was doing? How close was he on the mountain? Was he closer to Moses or was he closer to the people? Was he midway? Was he forming a bridge between Moses and God and the people? What
Really, really good questions. So let's go on to the next source and see what Ibn Ezra has to say. Okay. So Abraham ben Meir ibn Ezra is from the 12th century in the Basque region of Spain, which was Muslim controlled. Thus, his name is Ibn Ezra, not Ben Ezra. So, Ibn is an Arabic word. Ibn Ezra traveled to Cordoba and Baghdad from Spain. He wrote in Judeo-Arabic, which is sort of like the equivalent of Yiddish is German and Hebrew. This is Judeo-Arabic, is like a mixture of Arabic and Hebrew, and it's written in Arabic characters. And Ibn Ezra analyzed the text for simple meanings and for grammar and linguistics. And he is known for noticing that the Torah had phrases in it that indicate that it couldn't possibly all have been written by Moses, including things like Moses's own death and phrases like on the other side of the Jordan, which don't make sense as something that Moses would have written. There is a phrase that says on the other side of the Jordan that is clearly written from the perspective of somebody who is on the Israel side of the Jordan, talking about the people being on the Jordan side of the Jordan River. But the later rabbis chose to interpret that writing as having been divinely dictated. But Ibn Ezra pointed out the discrepancy there, and the later rabbis kind of tried to blot that out and cover it over. So let's read the Ibn Ezra. Let's see, Arlene, would you like to read that? We need to make sure that you unmute yourself.
Sorry about that. And Moses rose up. We may logically conclude that Joshua left the camp of Israel with Moses and stayed beneath the mountain until Moses came down. Observe, Joshua knew nothing about the making of the golden calf. There is no reason to ask, what did Joshua eat? Joshua gathered the manna, which was around the camp, and ate it daily.
Okay, so what questions did Ibn Ezra deal with, and what did he answer?
He's apparently a dietary expert.
Okay. Did he help answer the question that Rashi left us with?
Yes. He answered where Joshua was. But what I find difficult is he indicates that Joshua came down the mountain with Moses. And that does not seem to be what the Torah says, because it indicates that Moses came down the mountain with God's tablets.
Well,
and then he destroyed them.
Right.
And he went back up the mountain. I would gather from that Joshua was still up the mountain at that time.
Right. So he he indicates that he makes it clear that Joshua didn't know about the golden calf. And we know this from the text, actually, because in the text, there's a conversation which I did not include on our source sheet, but there's a conversation between Joshua and Moses where Joshua is saying, I hear sounds in the camp. There's singing going on down there. Joshua is wondering what the singing is all about, and Moses says to Joshua, the singing is that they're doing something terrible. They're doing they're rapping. Yes. Well, they're having a they're doing he indicates what he learned from God, which is that they are they're violating the laws. God is not explicit about the golden calf, but that they are that they're violating the rules. And here is Ibn Ezra saying that Joshua knew nothing about the making of the golden calf. So there is indication that Joshua was not all the way back in the camp. He might have been at the foot of the mountain. But thanks, Anita, Exodus 32:17, right? So he might not have been all the way back at the camp. So he didn't observe the golden calf. He wasn't all the way back in the camp, but he was maybe part of the way down the mountain. Wherever he was, there was manna, but he wasn't all the way back in the camp far enough that he participated or really knew what was going on. So let's go on to the last source that I shared, which says a little bit more about this. And the source is named Chizkuni, but Chizkuni is actually not the name of the author. Chizkuni is Hezekiah ben Manoah, but Chizkuni is Hezekiah ben Manoah's most famous book. So there are a lot of Torah scholars, medieval Torah scholars, who are known by the name of their most famous book. So this is as if Mario Puzo was called the Godfather, or Stephen King was known as The Shining. So Chizkuni is called Chizkuni because Chizkuni was the name of his most famous book, which was a Torah commentary. He wrote in 13th century France, and most of what he did was compiled what his elders said, but he also added some of his own ideas. So let's see, who's going to read us the Chizkuni? How about Phil?
Whereas his personal valet, Joshua, etc., he remained seated at the bottom of the mountain until his master would return. In the meantime, he was fed daily by a portion of manna.
Good. Okay. So this seems to indicate that he was putting together some of the other things that his elders had said, and helps us to understand the picture of what happened.
Why excuse me.
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, what does that expression mean? His personal valet? That doesn't seem very biblical.
Well, it means that Joshua was Moses's attendant. He was his attendant. He took care of everything for him. Yeah, I'm not certain about the word valet. You're right. It doesn't feel like a particularly biblical word. But yeah, it's an interesting turn of phrase. But this isn't from the Bible, right? This is from the 13th century. And I guess 13th century France, they must have had personal valets.
Valet in that period of time probably meant servant.
Yes, manservant, person who helped attend to him. Okay.
I have a question.
Yes, please.
I'm trying to find these texts already assume that Joshua had been identified as Moses' assistant.
Yes.
When is and I haven't looked it up, when is the first time when we read that Moses said Joshua, I see where it's the first time with the battle of Amalek, but that text doesn't say he's appointed Joshua as his assistant. It just says what he did to affect the battle. I can't remember when it is that Moses actually says, "You're my guy."
No, I don't think that we have explicit text that talks about when he was appointed as his guy.
Well,
We
until
later, we
Moses
later-
dies, until he's
yeah,
about to
You
die,
have
right?
the fact,
exactly.
you have the fact that Moses tells him to get an army and go out in battle. In other words, he appoints him as his general.
Yeah. We have some later text, which we'll get to on this source sheet, that talks about the fact that Joshua was his servant since his youth. But we don't have that in the Torah text. We don't have that early backstory. And I think we find that a lot of times, that there's a lot of detail that's left out, that, you know, we don't always have that backstory explicitly in the text. Sometimes we learn it later. And this is one of those cases. We don't know, we don't hear about it ahead of time. We hear it kind of in retrospect. So I think that's the case here. So what I find so interesting here is that the questions that you might have about the text, all of these biblical scholars found those same questions and more. And it is interesting to be able to look at these pieces of text and go, what's going on here? What is the question that I have? And then you can dive in and see if you can find some biblical scholar from ancient times who, or medieval times, or more contemporary times, who has an answer to it. Now, their answers sometimes come from other references in text, and sometimes they come from their imaginations of, well, it must be true that this is what was happening. And just as they were able to say, well, this must be what was going on, we can do that too. And sometimes we can do that based on other texts that we find places, and sometimes we do it based on human behavior and what we know about the way people function. So it's always okay to ask those questions. In fact, that's our job, is to ask those questions. So let's move on to this next chunk, which is Joshua in the tent of meeting. And we're going to learn a little bit more about who Joshua was as a person, or who the sages, who the rabbis like to think Joshua was as a person. Let's see. Robin, can you read the portion, Exodus 33:11?
Adonai would speak to Moses face to face as one person speaks to another, and he would then return to the camp, but his attendant Joshua, son of Nun, serving as deputy, would not stir out of the tent.
Right. So the verse highlights that Joshua was constantly in the presence of God, and it tries to highlight, or the rabbis pay attention to, the dedication. They like to see this as Joshua's dedication to spiritual learning. So now we are going to become Talmud scholars. So here we go with some Talmud. And so what's Talmud? Does anybody want to give me a one-sentence description of what the Talmud is, or do you want me to dive in and do that?
It's commentary. It's an oral tradition that was finally written down about the Tanakh.
Absolutely. So the word Talmud means learning. It's the primary source of Jewish law and theology, and it was written down over centuries. There are 63 different tractates or books of the Talmud. Each one of them covers its own subject area. It's mostly written in Babylonian Aramaic. As you said, it was started as an oral tradition, but it was written down and compiled between the year 70 CE, which was after the destruction of the temple, and completed being written down around the year 500. It's a conversation and a debate among many rabbis, and all of the minority opinions are preserved, which is pretty incredible. It's not just a code, or at least we don't know if it's all of the minority opinions, but certainly a lot of them. It's not just a code of law, but we get to see the conversations that they're having. We see like Rabbi Ashi said this, but Rabbi Yossi said that and argued this. And sometimes, or often actually, the arguments are between rabbis of different generations who actually never met each other. So it's sort of like if you read a constitutional law book and it said, James Madison said this, and Barack Obama retorted that, but Ruth Bader Ginsburg argued this, as if they were all in the same room together. It's kind of awesome, and it includes law, ethics, customs, philosophy, stories. Sometimes they're fanciful, sometimes they're risque and hilarious. And there's history, and there's medical advice, and there's recipes. There's some stuff that's really filthy. We can talk offline about some of that. It's really kind of funny. And when it's printed, it looks like this picture that I have over here, where the main jumping off point, which is the Mishnah, is over on the right-hand page. It's in the center of the right-hand page. And then the discussions, which are the Gemara, are written in set areas all around the page and on the facing page. And you'll see in this translation that I have here that some of the words in the translation are in bold and some of them aren't. The words that are in the bold are the ones that are actually in the Talmud, in the text. And the others are added in the translation to give context and explain what's going on. So, Josh, do you want to read us from the Talmud?
Sure.
Yeah, thank you.
Rabbi Yonatan explains, the Holy One, blessed be he, saw Joshua and observed that the words of Torah were very precious to him. As it is stated, and the Lord spoke to Moses face to face, and his servant Joshua, son of Nun, a young man, did not depart from the tent. The Holy One, blessed be he, said to Joshua, Joshua, are the words of Torah so precious to you? I bless you that this Torah scroll shall not depart from your mouth.
Thank you. Okay, so what do you think is going on here that we're focusing on the fact that Joshua is a Torah scholar? I'll give you a hint about my thoughts here. The book of Joshua, where Joshua is a general, is probably the bloodiest book in the whole Torah. So what do you think might be going on here?
Joshua didn't speak, God didn't speak to Joshua. Joshua just stayed in the tent and absorbed whatever Moses was experiencing. Because God never really talked Torah to Joshua, right? I mean, it says that
This is no in this verse here, it says Moses left the tent, but Joshua stayed in the tent after Moses left.
right,
So
but
the
God spoke to
implication- yeah,
God
the
spoke to
implication,
Moses
right.
face to face, but Joshua didn't have that experience.
Not at this point, no. But the implication that the rabbis want us to hear is that Joshua was in there contemplating and studying. And there's actually another midrash that I'll share. That says, when Moses was about to die, he said to Joshua, "Ask me about any matters of law about which you are in doubt." Joshua replied, "My master, have I ever left you even for as little as 1 hour and gone elsewhere? Have you not in fact written of me, his servant Joshua, the son of Nun, departed not out of the tabernacle where I studied Torah constantly?" So, okay, so
It's
any
like
thoughts?
he was almost like a leader in training. He was staying always in God's presence until Moses died. And then when Moses died, we start in the book of Joshua, how he comes out and he becomes that leader.
Yes.
So he's very much like, you could say he's in college, and then, when Moses passes away, he comes out into the world and he assumes leadership.
Yes, and I think that the rabbis, when they characterize when they characterize Joshua as a scholar and as someone who is so interested in learning, that they are trying to say, yeah, he was a bloody general, but he did it for the sake of what he learned about what God wanted. And he wasn't a one-sided person. He wasn't just a bloody general. He had God's intention in his heart, and he wanted to be a good person. And he wanted to study the law and do what God intended. I think that was the rabbis trying to put a very positive spin on a character who could otherwise have been seen as having very bloodthirsty attributes.
I have a question.
That's a way that I see this.
I have a question. When I'm looking at this text, it says, "I bless you that this Torah scroll shall not depart from your mouth." To me, the interpretation is that it's a secret and he can't tell anyone. Is that the correct interpretation here?
I've not seen it that way, but it's your interpretation, so I think that's beautiful. I'm
not sure.
Let me just stop you for a second. It is almost 8 o'clock. I know 2 of the people in our class have to leave because they have another class. So I want to say good night to them, right?
Yeah.
We will be back here again next week. And we will finish the preparatory parts of Joshua before we go into the book of Joshua. I am going to send you all a note asking questions just briefly about what you thought of what we studied, and to get an idea of any thoughts you have about the pace we're going at and what we've been talking about, and any questions you have so we can follow up. And we will continue on the question you were just asking. But thank you. I just want to say again, you're welcome to make donations at pneshore.org. Check out the website and our Facebook group and watch our videos. Panay Shore is our little shtibel from our house where we like to have services on every morning and on Shabbat mornings and do learning and have all kinds of events here. And we are thrilled to welcome you for this inaugural class. So I can stay on for a few more minutes,
Okay.
but I just wanted to make sure that the people who had to get to their rabbinical school class got a goodbye. Let's just stay on for another moment. So Diane, you were saying that you thought that this Torah scroll shall not depart from your mouth. You think this means it shouldn't
It shouldn't be
should
shared.
let it out? No,
Shouldn't be shared. Maybe the people of Israel were not ready for it. Or another interpretation is that no matter what you go through, no matter how bloody things get, always remember the Torah.
I see it as the second and not the first.
And I see it as something different. And that's why I was going to say,
Please.
Diane, there is no correct.
Yes.
Yeah, it's
Part
Absolutely.
of this makes me feel like this is the rabbis apologizing for Joshua's future actions.
Exactly.
Trying to whitewash, what he does later on in his military career, and trying to hearken back to moments where they can sort of apologize for that by highlighting some moments of spirituality of Torah with him. So I think I think sometimes the rabbis sort of bend over backwards to make our leaders not so, their actions not so abhorrent as they seem. And so they kind of walk it back.
Yes. You're doing an excellent job of explaining what I was trying to say was exactly is that I think that the rabbis are trying to make him look like a yeshiva bucher.
Right.
And that everything that he does later on in his book, which is exceptionally bloodthirsty, but he has a good neshama,
Yes.
he's a good boy. He's a good boy.
Study Torah.
He studies Torah. He sits in shul all day.
Joshua is not the only leader in the early times when supposedly God told the leader to go out and kill off an entire tribe.
That's true.
Oh,
Right.
That's very true. And
it was always at God's insistence.
yes.
Right. And there was
Which
always
to
this
me
idea that it was
indicates
God's on our side.
Somebody is either eating mushrooms or smoking too much.
Right.
Well, and we have to be careful about the fact that there are contemporary cases where the same thing gets said with horrible, horrible consequences. So
Right.
we're going to leave it there.
Okay.
We're going to pick this up next week with Joshua and scouting out the land. Whether we get into the book of Joshua at all next week or not, I don't know, but we will continue next week. I do want to tell you that January 28th, I will be doing an online music conference, so we will not be having class that day, so you can free up that evening for yourselves. But I'm really excited about how this is going, and thank you so very much for being part of it.
Oh, thank you. It was wonderful.
Great.
It was excellent. It was really wonderful.
Wonderful. Thanks a lot.
A blessing on your head.
Mazel tov.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Shavua tov.
Shavua tov.
Joshua fought the battle of Jericho, Jericho.